Hello, my name is Beck, and recently I posted the DNF book tag, but today I'm going to talk about books that I have DNF'd that were quite popular books, and for whatever reason they just didn't quite hit the right note with me. Maybe I was in the wrong mood, maybe I just didn't connect with the writing style, but let's get into the books that I have DNF'd. The first one is a book that has been making its rounds on BookTube, Bookstagram and BookTwitter, and it's got a beautiful cover. Unfortunately, I tried the audiobook for this one and I just didn't connect with the writing style. It may have been the way that the narrator was performing it, but it might have been a mixture of the audio narrator and the actual way that it was written, and copies of this physically are quite expensive, so I haven't actually gone out and bought it myself, and my library doesn't have a copy. But the book I'm talking about is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, and this is, I think it's like a older YA with middle grade tones, and it's about a guy who is just in this, usual 9-to-5 job, and he gets sent out to this house in the Cerulean Sea, and there are a bunch of kids there. They're supernatural kids, and one of them is Satan incarnate, I think, and I think it's a love story between the guy who gets sent out there and the guy who is the headmaster of the school. It's like Good Omens, but in a book. At least those are the vibes I've heard it compared to. And I was someone who didn't connect with the vibe of the Good Omens show, even though I love David Tennant. So I think, unfortunately, that book is just a miss for me, and I wish it was a hit. So that's probably the one that I'm most disappointed about on this list. Next is a book that I have also seen a lot of people talking about recently, and I tried the audiobook for this one and I didn't like the way that it was written, I think, and it's Gideon the Ninth, and this is pitched as lesbian necromancers. And I think just the way that it opened up, it just grabbed you by the scruff of the neck and threw you into its world, and I think it's sci-fi fantasy, and the way that it did that was very disorienting, and it was into a conversation between Gideon, I imagine, and the girl who is like her enemy. I think it's like an enemy to lovers kind of story, and it throws you into that story, and their dialogue was just so familiar already, and I was like, what is going on here? What is the context? Where are they? So I think it was just a bit of a false start, and potentially this one is one that I can go back to in the future and retry, but at the moment, unfortunately, it's also a DNF for me. Next is one that is probably easy to predict because I've talked about it ages ago in a reading vlog, and it's the third book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. I think it's Storm of Swords, book 3, and I ended up not finishing that because I started it, I don't even know if I got 10% in, but I found that the depictions of women just get worse and worse and worse in that series, and I know going in that's something I expected, but it just started to excuse and condone rape of the women in the book by some of the main male protagonists. And I know it's dark, and I know that that is just the theme of the world, but it just got under my skin. And everybody has this line, and Game of Thrones falls on the other side of that line for me. So I think it was just a bit too much, and that's why I DNF'd it. I did, up to that point, really like A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings. I think I gave both of them 4 stars each, and I listened to the audiobooks for those. So it was like revisiting the show because I understood all of the characters. And so visually in my head, I could imagine who was who. But when I got to the third book, while I was interested in the story, the way it handled things was just uncomfortable, and it also really sexualized Arya, and she's like 11, so that's a no from me. The fourth book on this list might be a little bit surprising considering my love of fantasy, and this is actually a young adult fantasy, and it had a unique premise, but the way that it was executed was just quite convoluted, at least personally to me. I think I talked about it in a vlog, but it is Truthwitch by Susan Dennard, and I know a lot of people like this one as well. It's like a BookTube veteran. A lot of people loved this in a big wave a little while ago, and I think it's a quartet, so the most recent book might have just come out. And I know this follows 2 best friends, and I think they were raised together and grew up together. One of them is a truth witch and the other is a sight switch, and a sight switch can kind of predict the threads of how people are tied together, like kind of like predicting the future. And a truth witch can obviously tell truth from lies. And so it's about these 2, I think, potentially getting separated and then having to survive, and they're also being tracked by this guy who's a blood witch. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but the way it was told with the 2 characters, they're both girls, they both grew up in the same place with the same influencing factors, and so I found that their voices were very, very similar, and so when I was reading it, it was very samey to me. So I think because the way the narrative worked that way, it alienated me a bit, and it also dove straight into the action before I'd understood who these characters were, so I wasn't invested in how the outcomes of these fights and these action scenes happened because I didn't care about the characters yet. So it kind of read like a bit like spectacle, and it also read convoluted to me. So that is unfortunately why I did not finish Truthwitch, and I really wanted to like that one. Next is a contemporary, and I talked about this in a vlog as well. So all the videos I talk about, I'm going to link below just to make it easy. But this one is Holding Up the Universe by Jennifer Niven. And I actually loved All the Bright Places by her. I think I gave that a 4 stars. I didn't cry, even though I thought I would, but I saw Jennifer Niven do a panel a couple of years ago, and the way that she talked and the way that she interacted with her fans and the way that she discussed the themes of the book, I understood from her perspective the romantic kind of nature in there and the way that she'd encountered mental health in her own life and with those people that she loved. So I liked All the Bright Places because of that. But then when I read Holding Up the Universe, I liked the 2 characters in it. They had a great chemistry. But the premise for that was one girl who was so obese that she had to get cut out of her house. And then a couple of years later, she is rehabilitated. She's gone to therapy, which was the only positively conveyed thing in this book. And she's now, you know, I guess regular size. She's quite thin, to be honest. The way that she was described was like 100 pounds, maybe less. And I think that's about 50 to 60 kilos in Australian measurements. So that's like a regular weight for somebody her age, a regular weight. And when I was reading it and everyone was still bullying her for being fat, I was like, I'm out, because it just seemed to be perpetuated in the book to make the angst of the main character go forward, and it was quite unsettling, and it was just a bad message. And I think I got like 100 and something or 200 pages into that book before I put it down. Just when I found out her weight and I googled it, I did kind of like whiplash, and then I was like, no, I'm not reading that anymore. So while I like the writing style and the main characters in that book, I wasn't a fan of that theme being so strong, so that's why I DNF'd it. Next is a book that I have a lot of nostalgia for, but I can't go back and reread it because I've already tried and I couldn't get back into the writing style, but 16-year-old me, 15-year-old me really loved it, and that is Vampire Academy, and I absolutely devoured this whole series. I loved it so much when I first read it, but now that I read more to review books, and now that I know my tastes more and I've read a lot more widely, I go back to Vampire Academy, and the writing style is just not something that I can get immersed in, unfortunately. So I tried reading Vampire Academy and I barely got a couple of pages in and I just couldn't do it, and that made me really sad. So I didn't try again and I unhauled my books because I just want to keep them in my memory as an enjoyment that I had when I was a teenager, and that's how they're going to remain. I don't want to like tarnish that memory by rereading them or trying to reread them again. So I think I'm just going to live vicariously through other people's enjoyment of that series now. But I also quite like the movie, which might be an unpopular opinion, but I like that series, I like that movie, and that is like a time capsule of teenage me. So I'm just going to leave that there and move on with my reading life. And then the last book is actually the most recent thing that I have DNF'd as I'm filming this video, and it is Horns by Joe Hill. And like Vampire Academy, I actually really like the movie adaptation, but unlike Vampire Academy, this one actually stuck really, really closely to the source material. So Horns is about this guy named Ig, and he wakes up one day and he's literally grown horns out of his head, and these horns compel people to tell him the truth. And he believes that he is cursed because his wife has been, his partner, not his wife, but his partner has been murdered, and I think raped and murdered quite brutally years ago. And now, because he hasn't recovered from obviously his grief about that, he's now grown horns. And everyone in this village or town or wherever he lives believe that he did it, and he didn't do it, but he's also not a good person either. So I like the way that the narrative explored that, and it wasn't really a murder mystery because you know kind of who the killer is. It was more an exploration of people and their dark sides and their truthful sides, and that's what I liked about the movie. And also Daniel Radcliffe was in it and he did a wonderful performance. But when I read the audiobook, the narrator was amazing, but the way that the story was written, I was interested in like the first chunk of it. And then after that, I didn't really care. I think it had pacing issues because I kept getting invested and then it felt convoluted, and then there was a flashback that felt kind of out of place, and then it was developing characters that I didn't care about. So I think there was a whole bunch of stuff going on with that book, and I got like 77% into the audiobook, and I thought I can just push through it. I can do this, I can finish it. And I just couldn't, because it was putting me in such a frustrated and bad mood, and it was sending me into a reading slump, and we don't want that here. So I DNF'd it for that reason. So those are all of the books that I have DNF'd. In some cases, like Horns, I'm not going to go back to them. Like Truthwitch and the Song of Ice and Fire series, I'm not going to go back to those. But I think it would be worth my time to go back to Gideon the Ninth and House in the Cerulean Sea, because I think given the chance I could really enjoy those books. I just have to be in the right mood for them, and I really hope that I can vibe with the writing style. So that is all of the popular books at this moment that I know I have DNF'd. Let me know if you have DNF'd or not bothered to start a popular book because you didn't think it would vibe with you. I would love to know, because all of our reading tastes are so individual, so I'd like to hear from you. But thank you so much for watching this video. I will talk to you in the comments, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye.